And thanks for joining our first tips and tricks session from testRigor. And we're really excited that you joined us. We are going to show you how to automate tests, and in terms of using no code, written in plain English, and it's going to reduce your maintenance costs to nothing. So our presenter today is Artem Galyabev, the CEO and founder of testRigor. So take it away, Artem. It's a half-hour session, so please ask your questions too, and we'll answer questions in the last half.
Hello, everyone, and I will try to make it as short as possible to leave as many time for your questions as possible. Okay, so testRigor is, as Connie mentioned, a functional end-to-end testing system, which allows you, as you very well know, to write tests, and those tests are from end user's perspective. So let me share my screen. So this is basically how it would compare to Selenium. There's a lot of code in Selenium you have to write, and there's bare minimum in testRigor, but that's not the point. The point is it executes purely from end user's perspective, avoiding the need to deal with details of implementation. Any of things like IDs, data test IDs, like names, XPaths, anything like that, are details of implementation, can change at any moment, and like therefore breaking the test for no reason. At testRigor, you don't have that. You just write it from end user's perspective. So that's your tip number one. testRigor, fortunately or unfortunately, actually very powerful, and you can write the test wrong way. So your best bet is to actually try and write the test as much as possible, as close as possible to how you would do it in English from end user's perspective. If you, for example, use like our recorder will give you some suggestions. If that is not kind of endpoint and single source of truth, it's just a suggestion. You should review it and maybe rephrase certain things. For example, if I were to click on this second update button here, what you probably want to do is you want to say click on update and change your password section. However, what recorder will tell you is click on update above phone numbers, because phone numbers text is technically closer to this update button compared to this one. So for our recorder system, there is not necessarily a way to guess what's the right way to express the steps. You definitely need to review those and fix those. Well, so that this session will be helpful, even though you already is advanced user of testRigor. I'll show you of a couple interesting settings which can affect your test pretty dramatically. And that is how stuff is being executed. If you go to settings, and there's a lot of actually settings in speed optimization section. As you can see, is quite a number. Your main, of course, is main wait timeout, is how long testRigor will wait until element is there or not. If you want higher stability, you might increase it in case of staging environment, because staging environment might not necessarily be optimized for performance the same way as production is. Like higher numbers are all right. If you're looking specifically for lower numbers and want intentionally to fail, if performance is not there, here's a place to change it. Now, another interesting point of testRigor, which has huge impact on how testRigor works, is this getting visibility of elements approach. We had to introduce it at some point in order to help our customers to achieve higher performance. And default right now is visible first. There are two options, visible first and batched. What does it mean? So if you go to the page, let's go to this sales Safeway. What visible first will do is it will just get elements which are visible on the screen and assume that everything else is non-existent. And this is a default approach for performance reasons, because there are a lot of cases where pages are huge. And if you try to get all the elements, it just takes longer. However, testRigor does have a way to deal with all elements on the page, even though they may not necessarily be visible on this current viewport. And that is to use this batched approach. If you go back to here, so this batched approach, which had been selected in here, means like it will work with all of them. It's called batched. You'll probably rename it because the number of elements oftentimes is so ginormous, it's even impossible to get it in one go. So we talk to browser in batches many times in order to be able to get all the elements on the screen, which are potentially visible. So here is, and that is definitely affecting how tests are run. If you are sticking with visible first approach, which is the default right now, if you were to create a new test suite, then if something is not visible, you would need to scroll to it first. And no worries, you can do scroll down until page contains certain things to make sure it just doesn't enough number of scrolls. So not a problem. In case if you select batched, then if an element would be visible, if you were to scroll, then it will be available. So that's the difference. And it's a big deal, and we suggest people to stick with visible first approach for performance reasons, because it's actually better reflects how we humans see the page. All right, I see there is a question there. What's the benefit of using testRigor compared with BDD frameworks like JBehave or Cucumber? Great question. So the testRigor is out of the box also a BDD framework. However, BDD is a process, and not every company necessarily follows the process in order to actually implement BDD. We see the majority of the company actually don't, because it's a little bit challenging oftentimes to change whatever processes are in an organization to achieve BDD. However, like if you do use BDD, what we see across the board with companies which do use BDD is that it is a three-step process, right? For UI testing, mind you, like API is separate. Let's say like we're doing UI testing for UI, it is 3 steps. So first, like with JBehave and Cucumber, at best case scenario, product managers or whatever, like it's called, quote unquote, business, would write the specification. Product owners would write the specification, what needs to be done. If like they're willing, they would write it in Gherkin. which is sometimes the case. Sometimes people are willing to write a specification in Gherkin. Then engineers would write the code matching that Gherkin specification, and then QA will come in and will write the code in Selenium to match Gherkin specification. So it's a three-step process, and there are two issues with this. Number one, QA engineers hooking up into details of implementation. That's a number one issue which we help our customers to avoid. And that is basically like it's a problem of saturation point. So at some point, the test maintenance is so ginormous, you can't build any more tests anymore. Like if with testRigor, you don't have to rely on details of implementation. So this is one. However, that's not only that. QA engineers can't build tests earlier in ATDD style because until engineers are done, there is not enough details to construct implementation of those Gherkin specifications. For example, it's unclear what XPath is going to be, or like whether there would be ID or data test ID or what have you. Like, of course, there are sometimes exceptions, but as a rule, like it is impossible. So therefore, it's three-step process. Now, the second issue is the three-step process itself, and that is if product managers wrote Gherkin specification such that engineers misunderstood that and understood it differently because they misunderstand it, or for whatever reason, maybe it was a mistake. Like this will only pop up later on after engineers already done and QA engineers are writing the tests, right? And then it will pop up that there is a mismatch with what product managers had in mind and what engineers coded, because usually QA engineers have a way of thinking similar to how product managers do it as opposed to how engineering thinking about it. But because there's like context, different contexts, there might be this misunderstanding. We see like but not necessarily often the issue, but it does come up from time to time. With testRigor, you can write the specification which is executable out of the box before engineers write the code. And then what engineers need to do is like, again, it's like ATDD. It had been possible with APIs. It just have never been possible with UI like that. However, with testRigor, it is possible to do with UI, where engineers would execute this executable specification and see if it's working or not. And this way, it will help engineering to avoid misunderstanding between what product managers mean when we write the specification and how engineers understand it when we code it. Moreover, if there are some issues that engineers see that we cannot actually do things like that, those issues will pop up earlier and be communicated back to product managers ASAP, not after the fact. And then it will basically make a more efficient process where there is less back and forth and making engineers rewrite the code to match what product managers actually meant. So it's a two-step process. Product managers, maybe with the help of QA engineers or just QA, write the specification, and then engineers write the code to match that specification. Is closer to how TDD looks like, as opposed to like Threestep. And finally, This is English. Remember, it's not only steps which are low-level steps which testRigor provides out of the box, as those ones which I'm highlighting, but also you can extract your own rules, or you might call them functions, in your own language. As such, let me show you an example of, let's say, go to registration, we go to those reusable rules. This is go to registration. Those are the steps in here. The trick is you can give arbitrary name to those steps. And the best practice is to give a name that matches the specification the way people in product managers talk about it themselves in their own words, in actual normal English language, not Gherkin. I mean, in testRigor, you can use Gherkin, but you don't have to. It is a superset of Gherkin. So you can actually give it, give those phrases exactly the same name as product managers have in their own specification. The way they talk about it, it encourages collaboration, makes your test cases easier to read and understand. And with those phrases available, another like third difference compared to Cucumber and JBehave is that Cucumber and JBehave require QA automation engineers to write code, literally. So somebody would have to write code. Usually Selenium, might be something else, it doesn't matter, but there is an engineering effort involved. In testRigor, you don't have to have engineers. You can, like manual testers can do that, product managers can do it, engineers can do it, anybody can do it, literally. As soon as you can read and write English, you're good to go. Especially if somebody, usually QA, would build all those phrases in advance, then it makes it yet even more easier to build tests, because it's literally matches how you yourself describe your own product in your own words, in that terminology which you yourself use in your company. Those basically three largest differences. So to go through it again, so number one is no reliance on details of implementation. Number two, it's a two-step process instead of three-step process. And number three, product managers or manual QA helping product managers can do that. You do not need necessarily to involve engineering. All right.
So there's another question, Artem. How does testRigor identify the locator? And does the engineer have the ability to correct it?
A good question. And the answer is that testRigor does not use locators. Basically, this is yet another point in here. So the whole point of testRigor being order of magnitude more stable and require order of magnitude, 2 orders of magnitude actually, is 200 times less time on test maintenance, is exactly because testRigor does not use locators, any type of locator whatsoever. testRigor is this executable specification in plain English. As you can see, you are expressing stuff from end user's perspective. And the advantage being is if the problem with Selenium is that it forces people to use locators and therefore hook up into how engineers implemented the page. And therefore, once implementation changes, sometimes unintentionally, because engineers, let's say, upgraded a library which renders certain elements on the page, and now is doing it differently. Selenium code would fail because it relied on those details of implementation. It relied on how things are in HTML. In testRigor, we don't do that. It basically you're specifying specification purely from end user's perspective. And because it's from end user's perspective, it doesn't matter that in implementation changes. As soon as from end user's perspective, it is the same thing. testRigor code will execute the same way. And this is the testRigor code. It's literally plain text, as you very well know, majority of you on this call, and you can even keep it in Git if you choose to do so. There is no hidden data. You see, like there's a lot of other tools. Like if you do like record and play and all this kind of stuff, we store ginormous amount of data about elements on a page you clicked on, including XPath and other locators, as you mentioned. However, it is basically a false way of doing that, because you're cooking up into details of how things implemented. In testRigor, there is none of that. Literally, you can copy paste this text, which is executable specifications, somewhere else, and it will execute it from scratch again. It will execute exactly the same way, because it basically behaves the same way how human would do it. Basically, you can think of testRigor as manual tester emulator. So you basically given instructions to very unsophisticated manual tester, so that your instructions must be very precise. But other than that, it's literally exactly how a manual tester would do it. So you basically, testRigor does indeed emulate the way humans would execute the steps, as opposed to hooking up into locators and details and implementation and stuff like that.
All right, there's another question. How does testRigor help to reduce time spent on test maintenance?
Well, number one reason is exactly that. You just, because you're not dealing with details of implementations, like locators, IDs, data test IDs, and so on and so forth. As soon as those details of implementation changes, you don't have to do anything, because in testRigor, you're just not relying on them at all whatsoever. Like that is literally number one reason why our customers spend 200 times less time maintaining the test code compared to Selenium and Appium. This is mostly how you do it. However, there are also tools. We are the only company on the planet which provide you with the tools to reduce maintenance. For example, testRigor extracts unique issues affecting potentially more than one test. You probably, as many of you are our customers, have already seen that in action. If a certain issue affects multiple tests, you will see one issue affecting multiple test cases, as opposed to just a lot of broken tests. That way you are elevating up on dealing with unique issues, as opposed to dealing with huge number of broken tests.
Okay. Next question. Can we use an API for testing?
You can use API for testing for that. You can go to resources, click on documentation, or go to documentation, Google testRigor documentation, and should be able to, or testRigor language support. You should be able to find this page. It's also available as a link from testrigor.com landing page. And here on the left, you see the menu, and you can go to API testing here, and it shows you a lot of examples, different ways how you can deal with different types of APIs. And more is coming.
All right, the last question. Is this web-based only, or can we automate testing on mobile apps?
You definitely can automate both web and mobile with testRigor. This is an example. I have it handy in here because a lot of people ask. It's an example of a mobile test on Android. As you can see, it's basically the same language here. Moreover, you can switch between web and mobile in the same test using the same language. And yet again, this is an example. In this particular example, we start from a mobile test, click something on mobile and say, here I say tap to distinguish it from click. Then we start a browser and switch where, open URL, and then basically proceed with sign up process for Twitter, and it even open up the email. So definitely you can do all of that in one test very easily, and that's a point of testRigor. It had been designed for end-to-end tests.
All right, well, that's all of our questions. We are going to start offering these every Wednesday at this time. And so the next session next week is on data sets. If you have any questions about, what Artem's talked about, please email us at sales@testrigor.com. Visit the website. You can get access to our free version, or you can request a demo. And so there's a question here. Is there a sandbox and where I can try it? So on the website, you can go and use the free version, or you can request a demo. So there's a sandbox there. I'll let Artem, you talk about the difference between the free and the trial, if we offered a person the trial.
You can go to testRigor.com, click start for free, and there is a free version available. Although please keep in mind it is open source, meaning that whatever you are writing as a code is public, everything is public, all screenshots are public, videos of your test executions are mandatorily recorded and published as public videos on YouTube and then tweeted in the Twitter. So this is great for people who are learning QA and want to brag about their skills, but that is definitely not applicable if you want to try something something related to professional life or related to your company. For that, you might want to just kick off a free trial of a private version.
Yeah, and if you talk to us, we can help you get going with that free trial. The very last question, and then we're going to wait till next week. What is the first step to write a test case?
The first step to write a test case is to create a test suite. Let me literally just do it here. So once you start testRigor, let's do safe way. You just copy the URL. Create a suite in here. Then you can go to resources, install our Chrome extension. And then you can speed up a little bit creating test cases. Let's stop in there. like by recording the stuff. Let's click add and run, go back. This is our test case. And that's it. Then you can basically modify it and extract. You can do it post factum, extract rules and stuff like that. We'll probably talk about it in next